Hello, everyone, and welcome to Irreverent Faith and Current Affairs with me, Jamie Franklin. Now, I was hoping to be joined by one of my vicar colleagues, and I'll name him. It was Tom Pelham, but unfortunately, Tom has had some vicar stuff come up. And because of this sort of time of year, this is the only time I can record this week. So it's just me. So I hope that's okay for you all just to say who I am. Maybe you've never listened to this before. I don't know. If you haven't, that's great. I'm really pleased. Basically, I'm a vicar in the Church of England. I've got two colleagues who do this show with me, and we talk about events in the news, things that are going on. And yeah, we hope that this is a way to help Christians to think about the world that they live in. Also, we try and do some sort of spiritual input as well with we do a bit of Bible reading at the beginning, and we've also introduced a really good section at the end, which many people have really enjoyed. Many people, great numbers, tremendous numbers. And it's called Hymn of the Week, and we choose a hymn of the week. Well, really, what I'm trying to do is make it relevant to the liturgical time that we're living in, which this week is Passiontide. And I've got a fantastic hymn for you. And actually, this is a hymn which perhaps isn't that well known. It's known to me, though. I learned about it for the first time when I was doing my curacy in Nottingham. And you'll have to stay tuned to find out what it is, because I'm not going to tell you now, because I want you to listen to the end, because that way you'll be with me for longer, and I won't feel so lonely and depressed. No, I'm not. I'm neither of those things. That's a joke. Sometimes a bit lonely, to be honest with you. It does get a bit lonely in here in this office. Anyway, that's a bit of a joke, a bit of banter there. Email the show, irreverentpod@gmail.com, if you've got comments, questions, or if you've got a hymn of the week to suggest, you can email in. And it's always good to hear from people. At the moment, I'm in the midst of preparation for Holy Week, it's Passiontide. Holy Week is a crazy time, really. It just, I feel last year I felt so emotional during Holy Week, and Easter was a great moment of real amazing uplift. I really felt like I was participating in the Easter story, and it was incredible. And I'm sure a similar thing will happen this year. But of course, you have to have you have to have Holy Week, or there's no Easter. That's the point, right? You have to have the cross, and if you don't have the cross, you don't have the exaltation, which is exactly what I'm about to speak about when I do our Bible reading, because I'm going to read from Philippians 2, um, 5 to 11, because it's the New Testament reading for this Sunday, and I've already composed a little meditation for it, which I'll share with you. I'll share with you right now, because you may not be going to church on um, Sunday. You may not be going to my church on Sunday, but nevertheless, I can still share with you my thoughts about this wonderful text, which in many ways is one of the most beautiful texts in all of the New Testament. But before we come to the text, it's a good time to pray at the beginning of the show, because we have to ask for God's guidance and help. We don't want to be speaking in a way which is redolent of our own sinfulness, of striving in our own strength, in our own flesh, in the sinful nature to speak. Rather, we want to speak in the name of Christ, and we want to speak generously with grace and also with truth. So let us pray to that end, and we'll say the Lord's Prayer that Jesus, our Saviour, taught us. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread. Forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen. Philippians 2, chapter 5. Sorry, Philippians chapter 2. It's been a long week. Verses 5 to 11. Have this mind among yourselves, which is yours in Christ Jesus, who, though he was in the form of God, did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but emptied himself, I should say, by taking the form of a servant, being born in the likeness of men, and being found in human form, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even death on a cross. Therefore God has highly exalted him and bestowed on him the name that is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, in heaven and on earth and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Amen. So one of the things that's kind of amazing about this is that Paul is taking an everyday squabble within the church, and he applies this Christology to it. It's like, to me, this is like him. It's a kind of like a theological nuclear weapon. It's like you've got this tiny little squabble, everyone's petty, everyone's arguing with each other over nothing. We don't even know what it was. And yet Paul comes in and he sort of, springs this incredible Christology on these people. And he says, look, this is Christ, this is the vision of Christ and the gospel and of the incarnation. This is what Christ did for you, and you're still behaving like this. You're still behaving in this petty, entitled, egotistical way. And look at what Christ has done for you. It's an amazing thing. And this is why he says, have this mind among yourselves. Identify with Jesus, not just be as Jesus was, but represent Christ's spirit in the situation and the life that you have here and now. Be a living embodiment of Jesus Christ. And he reminds them, of course, of the incarnation. He says Jesus was in the form of God. He didn't count equality with God something to hold on to, but he emptied himself by becoming a servant and being born in the likeness of men. Now, that emptying, many people will know this is the Greek word that's behind this. It's quite a famous Greek word. It's the word kenosis. And there's lots of talk about what this kenosis actually means. What does it mean that Christ became kenotic in this sense? Some people have speculated that it means that, he laid aside his divinity. But the way I like to put it is not that he laid aside his divinity, but he laid aside his majesty. There's a lovely song that starts like that. You laid aside your majesty. And that's what Christ did. He laid aside his majesty by becoming a man and taking up a human life and becoming like we are, suffering as we do, entering time, entering history, being born as a child and growing to be a man and having the full range of human experience, not just his terrible suffering and death, but the everyday drudgery of a human life. This is how he laid aside his majesty. This is what he did for us. He became as we are. His divinity and his humanity were joined in that sense. So Christ came down to us, and as the Eastern Orthodox emphasize, he dignified humanity and he joined himself with humanity so that we might be raised to the divine, so that we might become gods in that sense. That's what I think it was Tertullian, was it, or Irenaeus, who said, God became man so that man might become God. And of course, we recognize supremely as we come into Holy Week the extent of Christ's humbling of himself in becoming a man and becoming obedient, not just obedient in a few things, but obedient in everything, obedient even to the point of death, even death on a cross, even to the point of suffering the rejection of the crowds, the mocking of the soldiers, the agonizing pain as he was nailed to the cross, the cry of desolation as he felt abandoned by his Father, and of course the yielding up of his spirit. He tasted death for us. And this is how he emptied himself on our behalf. He could not have emptied himself. He could not have poured himself out more completely than this. And this is what God has done for us. This is what God has done for us. People wonder, who is God? What is God like? That's what God's like. It's an amazing thing. This is Christ's humility. This is his emptying of himself. This is his love. And this is what we are joined to. This is what we participate in this season of Passiontide and Holy Week and Easter. It's something which is, when you think about it, it's overwhelming. And there's a beautiful Passiontide hymn, which I think is by Vaughan Williams. And it starts, and many people know it. It's not Hymn of the Week, but it's one of the great hymns of Passiontide. It is a thing too wonderful, almost too wonderful to be. I think that's it. I think it is the thing most wonderful, almost too wonderful to be. And sometimes I think about it and I think, wow, that is true, isn't it? Because how could this be that God would do this for us? And yet he has. It seems to me to be a story which is beyond human imagination. You wouldn't make this up. You couldn't make this up. You couldn't make him up. You couldn't make him up. He is who he says he is. And he has done this for us. And we celebrate this, but not yet, not fully anyway, although we feel the anticipation of the Easter joy rising in our hearts. And I do feel it, even in the midst of the weight of sorrow of everyday life. But don't feel too sorry for me, because I don't want to overemphasize my sorrow. I know people who are really suffering terribly, and The gospel is our hope. I feel that more and more each day. Sometimes it weighs on me more heavily than others, particularly when I come into contact with the suffering of other people. The gospel is our hope. Christ is our hope. Christ's humility, his obedience. I love in the Book of Common Prayer, where in the litany, where it says, by thy fasting, by thy nativity, by thy childhood, and all this kind of stuff. Good Lord, deliver us, because it brings into what it does is it makes the point that it's not just Christ's sacrifice on the cross that saves us, but it's his whole life. His whole life was one act of obedience from beginning to end. All of it, all of it. His nativity, his conception, which we celebrate today, his nativity, his childhood, his fasting, his years of anonymity, and then his ministry, his teaching, his miracles, his suffering, his bloody sweat, his death on the cross, all of it is is a demonstration, it's an outworking of his obedience and his humility and his perfect life, which is offered to us. Not just the cross, but the cross is a culmination of that sacrifice. It's an incredible thought because he just did it for us. I believe that that's the case. He did it for us. I know that, some people there might be some kind of theological quibbling over like whether he would have come anyway, even if there was no sin. And, that's an interesting theological debate. But fundamentally, he did it for us. And there's no other reason to do it but love, as Julian of Norwich says. His meaning was love. His meaning was love. Beautiful. The gospel is beautiful. We make it so ugly some of the time. We do, and we lose sight of it. But when we catch a glimpse of the glory and the beauty of God, it's one of the really interesting things about like Christianity and the aesthetics of Christianity is, the Platonic inheritance was taken up into Christianity and the notion of the sort of transcendental realm of goodness, beauty, and truth. But beauty in particular is transfigured in the light of the cross. Beauty, the paradigm of beauty is no longer, your kind of your chiseled six pack and huge pecs and the kind of thing actually Michelangelo's David is the image that comes to my mind. I know that's a Christian statue, but that kind of aesthetic that was prevalent in the Greco-Roman world as the paradigm, the epitome of beauty. For Christianity, it's no longer that. For Christianity, the paradigm of beauty shines forth most clearly in the image of a crucified man on the cross, broken, bleeding, beaten, scarred, poured out for us. And that's what beauty is. That's what love is. This is what has been revealed to us. Amen. So that's my reflection. I hope you enjoyed that. Now I'm going to talk about some stories of the week. And some of them are maybe slightly heartening, but increasingly it seems like as we move away from a Christian outlook, as we move away from a Christian view of the world, we are taking some steps which are deeply, deeply worrying, deeply, deeply troubling. And I'm going to talk about one of them that happened last week. And if I can find it, I keep on losing my tab here. So this would be that in the House of Lords, um, so just to explain this, essentially there's a bill that's gone through the House of Commons. There's an amendment, I think it's called like the Policing and Crime Bill or something like that. But the amendment to it, which isn't actually directly relevant to the bill itself, is to legalize abortion up to birth. Essentially, it's to not prosecute or criminalize women who carry out abortions after the legal limit, which is essentially to decriminalize it. It's to decriminalize it whilst at the same time not making provision for, e.g., the NHS to carry out these things. So it's not legal to do it, and therefore NHS hospitals won't do it. But if women do it somehow, if they use like pills through the post or something to do it, they won't be prosecuted. So it's to actually legalize it, but probably in the worst way that it could possibly be legalized, because it will be done, on the hoof. And if women, for example, I don't know, try and carry out an abortion at home and it goes wrong, then, well, what do they do? I suppose they can go to hospital, but it seems to be yeah, a terribly dangerous and well, I mean, clearly immoral thing. It's essentially legalizing infanticide, and we're getting closer to the point now. I mean, I think abortion is infanticide in general, just to say, because I don't see any ontological distinction between an unborn child and a born child. But even so, even more obviously, it's infanticide. And yeah, this to me seems to be another manifestation of the post-Christian culture of death, which I spoke about in my book, The Great Return. This kind of thing, the proliferation and expansion of abortion has continued apace since it was legalized in the late 1960s. The statistics now are extraordinary, hundreds of thousands of abortions every year. And it seems to be the case that the only people who are not allowed to have any rights in this nation are the unborn, increasingly so up to birth. Why people want to do things like this, why they want to remove the remaining protection that unborn children have from them is beyond me. I think it doesn't make any rational or logical sense whatsoever, unless you say that there is nothing sacred about human life, and we should just be entitled to take it when it suits us, based on whatever our ideology happens to be. That's what I think. In which case, this is acceptable, but then safeguarding human life in general is well, I suppose it's a question of whether that's ever legitimate in that case, what human life actually legitimately can be safeguarded under those circumstances. And I suppose the answer to that is the lives of the strong, which is where we're going. Might makes right. The powerful will have their lives protected and safeguarded. Everyone else's lives are up for grabs. And that's the way it was in the pagan culture in which Christianity was birthed, more or less. They were more philosophically sophisticated than we are in many ways, but that's nevertheless the case. It was a culture of death. This is increasingly becoming a culture of death also. It's very worrying. Let's read from the Church Times article. The Archbishop of Canterbury, speaking in the House of Lords on Wednesday night against the decriminalisation of abortions carried out outside the legal framework, said that the legislation risks making an imperfect situation worse. Nevertheless, a majority of peers went on to vote for full decriminalisation. Mullally spoke of the CFE's principled opposition to abortion and to this move, with the usual caveat that there can be limited conditions under which abortion may be preferable to any available alternatives. I shared last week how many abortions are actually carried out under that rationale, and it's basically almost none. I mean, it's very, very, very few. You'd be talking about extremely dangerous cases of ectopic pregnancies, for example, which are very, very rare. So it's a separate issue. And so, yes, the legal framework includes the need for the signatures of two doctors and limits on when terminations can be carried out. Under the 1967 Abortion Act, a registered medical professional could terminate a pregnancy within 28 weeks when there was a risk to the life of the pregnant woman or harm to her physical and mental health. And again, that rationale, harm to her physical and mental health, that is the overwhelming majority of abortions are carried out under that rationale, not the risk of life. In 1990, the Human Fertilization and Embryology Act lowered the time limit to 24 weeks in most cases, and restrictions were removed for late abortions in cases of risk to life, fetal abnormality, or grave physical and mental injury to women. I'd have to look up, but I wonder whether that was when it was made legal for abortions to be carried out because of cleft palate, which I'm very late in the pregnancy. I'm fairly sure that's the case. Please correct me if I'm wrong about that. Anyway, so that's what happened. Baroness Monckton, who tried to have this amendment struck off, it was her initiative, said decriminalisation of abortion is a question of such legal, moral, and practical complexity that I do believe it cannot be properly addressed in an amendment to a hastily added in an amendment hastily added to another bill, consideration of any alteration to our abortion laws need public consultation and robust parliamentary processes to ensure that every aspect of this debate is carefully considered and scrutinised. But it wasn't, because life is cheap in in this world that we're living in. It's not considered to be an important enough issue to debate publicly and to have that kind of robust parliamentary process that Moncton asks for. The other Lords Spiritual, that's the bishops present, were the bishops of Chelmsford, Coventry, Chester, Leicester, Southern, Nottingham, Paul Williams, that's my old bishop, Portsmouth, Sheffield, Chichester, Hereford, and Oxford. Well done to them for being there. But Moncton's amendment was lost by 185 to 148, which meant that essentially well, it meant that even if all the Lord Spiritual had shown up, then it wouldn't have made any difference because there wouldn't have been enough of them to vote against the bill. I personally would really question what could have been more important in their calendars than being present at that debate. They could have been responsible for safeguarding the lives of many, many children who may now end up being destroyed, terminated, killed, whatever you want to say, as a result of this bill. Um, so anyway, there we go. It is really a shame, isn't it? And this is important as well. Under current law, it's legal to take prescribed medication at home for termination if a woman is less than 10 weeks pregnant. During the first COVID-19 lockdown in March 2020, regulations were changed to allow women to have medical abortions at home after a phone or video consultation, in a move that was made permanent in 2022, meaning that women could take pills at home for gestation of up to 9 weeks and 6 days. So it's another example of how what happened during COVID-19 was an opportunity for the mission creep of the post-Christian liberal society to do something like this, to proliferate the possibility of women carrying out abortions at home after a phone or video consultation. So anyway, there we go. The UK director of the Evangelical Alliance, Peter Liner, said that he was also deeply concerned. He continued, as Christians, we believe every life has inherent dignity. Parliament must now act to address the risks created by this decision, ensuring women in crisis pregnancies receive compassionate, life-affirming support, and that both mother and child are cared for with dignity before and after birth. So there we are. I don't really have anything to add about that. And in many ways, I know what Peter Linus is saying, but it doesn't really matter, does it? Because this is the world we're living in, because we are rejecting Christ, we're rejecting the Christian religion, and things are only going to continue to move in these directions. Christianity, it has somewhat of a foothold to act as a bulwark against these things. The bishops in the House of the Lords should be part of that bulwark, or one of those bulwarks, but it doesn't really appear to be. I mean, it is quite disappointing, the amount of bishops who actually ended up in that debate. I would have liked there to be more of them. In fact, I'd have liked there to be all of them, really, a united show. I have to say that I think Sarah Mullally should have got them together. I don't think her eyes should have been on her 6-day pilgrimage. She should have got all the bishops together and said, I want all of us to go there and vote against it and speak against it together. That would have been real leadership. But instead, she was focused on planning a pilgrimage, regardless of when she heard about the debate. They need to do better. Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't want to be disrespectful, but I just think they need to do better in terms of their Christian witness. We have very few opportunities to witness in public to the faith and to really make a difference. And the bishops in the House of Lords, they do have opportunities. It does really make a difference. It can really make a difference what happens in terms of passing laws and so on. And yet they didn't manage it this time. How about something more cheerful? So this is interesting, and I don't know what to make of it because who knows? But essentially, there was a scoop in the Times, well, apparently an exclusive scoop in the Times by Roya Nicker, which said that Prince William confirms his in quotes, quiet faith and new, quote, commitment to the Church of England. After years of doubt, William draws a line in the sand on religion while redefining his future role as Supreme Governor. I wonder what that means when it says redefining his future role. Um, Anyway, so a couple of tweets and then I'll read a bit more of the substance. Ahead of Archbishop Sarah's enthronement, which the Prince and Princess of Wales will attend on Wednesday, William has signalled his intention to build a new, quote, strong and meaningful bond with the church and its leadership. And, quote, she's also an Aston Villa fan, which helps. Right, okay. Does it? Be better if she was a Spurs fan. His feeling is, quote, I might not be at church every day, but I believe in it. I want to support it, and this is an important aspect of my role and the next role, and I will take it very seriously. In my own way, he understands the importance of the role he'll inherit. Now, it's interesting there that he says, I might not be at church every day, because unless you're like a Roman Catholic who attends Mass every day, most Christians don't go to church every day. Indeed, even though I'm a vicar, I don't actually go to church every day, although I probably do most days because I have to open the building and, most days, I suppose, I don't know. Do I say an office in church every day? Don't think so. I do most of my offices at home. So not everyone's. So I just say to William that you don't have to be at church every day to be a committed Christian. Be really good if you could go to church every Sunday. I don't know if he does that. He doesn't say, but he does say he believes in it. Believes in, I don't know. Is he saying he believes in the church, or is he saying that he believes in the faith? Not really sure. Now I've got a couple of articles here. I have to say I don't have a subscription to the Times, so I'm going from what the Telegraph and the Church Times says. Let's have a look at the Church Times. The Prince of Wales' connection to the Church of England, quote, runs deep and is grounded in something personal and sincere. This is what an aide told the Sunday Times this week. 3 days before the Prince and Princess of Wales go to this enthronement, the newspaper reported the aide as saying that Prince William's, quote, commitment to the Church of England is something quieter than people expect, and for that reason it is not always fully understood. It's interesting, this use of this word quiet, isn't it? It reminds me of the terminology around the quiet revival. It's like people just quietly finding their way to faith. What's really going on, Prince William? Do you want to come on the podcast to talk about it? I mean, how amazing would that be if he came on to the podcast to talk about his quiet faith? Never going to happen. Never going to happen. But if you know him, please ask him. The aide continued, those who know him well recognize that his connection to the church, blah, 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 we've said that. Faith, service, and responsibility are themes that have long shaped the role he will one day inherit, and they are things he approaches in his own thoughtful way. At a time when institutions can be seen simply through a social or cultural lens, he understands that the church's role goes beyond this. That's good. It is not only part of the nation's heritage, but a living expression of faith rooted in prayer, compassion, and a belief in grace and redemption. Now that's good. That's the kind of thing I want to hear, because what's being said there is that the church doesn't just exist to ameliorate social conditions, but we're actually talking about a spiritual reality here. Now, it does ameliorate social conditions, I absolutely believe it, but it goes beyond that. And that's great, the way that that's articulated. I mean, I was reading this for a while thinking, oh, what's this all about? Is it just him sort of, trying to smooth over the fact that he's not really a Christian and he's going to be the head of the church, and that's a bit awkward? But actually, this is a great statement. It's not only part of the nation's heritage, which it is, but it's also a living expression of faith, rooted in prayer, compassion, and a belief, and this is almost the best bit, in grace and redemption. So that's fantastic. I mean, brilliant, acknowledging the role of the Church of England in the nation's heritage, but then also saying this is constitutive of a broader reality, which is the gospel, and which is Christ coming into the world to save us. So it's fantastic what that says. A source close to the Prince told the Sunday Times that his attendance at the enthronement was an, quote, opportunity to be very clear where he stood. And then you've got the thing about I might not be at church every day, etc., etc. Yes, okay. A royal aide told the Sunday Times this week that the Prince and the Archbishop had a warm and substantive conversation which reflected, quote, his genuine interest not only in the church's work, but in its role as a guardian of a distinctive and ancient English spiritual tradition that remains relevant in contemporary life. That's good. The Prince and Princess both feel, this is what Lambeth Palace said, it's important to build up that relationship. And a new Archbishop is a really great opportunity for that. She's also an Aston Villa fan, which helps, which I've already read. And that chafed with me the first time I read it. And now it's even more, it's niggling at me, this reveling in being an Aston Villa fan. Just because Aston Villa are doing well now. People always say, oh, I'm an Aston Villa fan. Same with Newcastle fans, although they've not been so good in recent weeks. It's like, oh, we've got some money, we're doing well. Oh, we've got a good coach. Oh, what's that? You're a Spurs fan, you're incredibly rich, but your team is rubbish and they're going to get relegated. Yeah, there's nothing I can do about it. Yeah, why do you keep rubbing it in all the time? Oh, that's terrible being a Spurs fan, I have to say. Anyway, this isn't a football podcast. I've thought about starting a football podcast as a kind of therapy for myself because I think it might be quite funny to have like a vicar doing a Spurs fan football podcast. But to be honest with you, I just don't really have very much time to do that sort of thing. Sorry. Anyway, well, I don't know what happened there. I just got off on a tangent. Lambersorth continued. The Prince and the Archbishop are both passionate about it, the church, not being a private members club and making it accessible and relevant. Yeah, I'm not sure about this kind of language. This isn't the kind of language I'd like to use. The improving relationship is wonderful and enables us to help defend and understand the Prince's position. We would love the future Supreme Governor to be at church every Sunday, but one has to be practical around the fact that they're a couple with young children. Oh gosh, that's not great, is it? Look, just because well, let me put it this way. If you've got young children, you have an obligation, even more so, to go to church than if it's just you. You've got to take them and raise them in the faith, right? Now, of course, sometimes you might miss church because you're like, you had some terrible night or something like that. But find a church with a great Sunday school or children's work and take them there. Look, we've got 4 young children and I'm not even available for my wife to help because I'm taking services, right? She still gets them to church. I don't understand. Like, I really don't like this kind of lowering of the bar that happens all the time, with the Church of England. It's like, you might think that, you should dress smartly to come to church. No, you don't have to do that. Wear flip-flops and a t-shirt. It's all fine because we're all relaxed and chilled out and stuff like that. I actually don't think that's the right way to go. Now, I'm not saying, oh, let's be all like formal and stuffy or anything like that. But this kind of thing, you've got to give some people something to aim for. You've got to give people some kind of challenge and to also imply that what you're promoting is valuable, right? And it's valuable enough to get out of bed it's valuable enough to get your children dressed for and to actually get them to church, right? Because this is talking about the gospel. It's Christ. It's an encounter with Christ in the liturgy, in the word, in the sacraments. It's a joining together with his people as we journey together through the liturgy into the kingdom and all this. Don't say, oh, well, we understand if you can't come. Don't say that. Say, yeah, it's great. Let's hope he goes to church every Sunday because he and his wife and his children will benefit extraordinarily from it. And he will be an even greater blessing to the nation as a result of it. And that's why I don't like this language as well of accessibility and relevance. In my opinion, the liturgy, we should make it as accessible as possible, but ultimately it's a journey into a mysterious and transcendent realm, which will be unfamiliar to people if it's done properly. And that's not a problem. In fact, that's a good thing because, people are surrounded by ugliness. They're surrounded by banality. They're surrounded by depressing modern architecture. And the whole point of the liturgy is that it lifts you from that everyday banality, from the sterility of the secular realm and its aesthetic and its ethic and so on and so forth. And it presents you with something transcendent, which is unfamiliar. But by its very nature, it has to be. Because it's designed to surprise you and to lift you up and to be something which is different, right? So in that sense, it's not really accessible. And also in that sense, it's not really relevant. At least it's not relevant to the world and the world's concerns. It's relevant to God and it's relevant to eternal matters. But to the world, in many ways, it's a complete irrelevance because they're thinking, well, why are you wasting your time going to church and worshipping God when you could be doing something worthwhile, valuable, ameliorating social conditions, or you could just be chilling out on Sunday morning. Why would you do that instead? And this is part of the problem. Let me put it this way. It's part of the temptation for the church, because the temptation for the church is then to say, well, actually worshipping God helps us to be better citizens. And that's why it's worthwhile. And that's why it's relevant. And there's a subtlety there because in a sense, there's definitely truth in that because it does do those things. In many cases, it does make you a better citizen, and it does make you a more caring and loving person. It does mean you give of yourself more, your time, your finances, and so on, and your energy. But that's not the point of it, right? That's a fruit of your faith. It's not the purpose of the faith. The purpose of the faith isn't to make you a good citizen of this world. The purpose of the faith is to make you a citizen of the kingdom. Our citizenship is in heaven, as the Apostle Paul says. And it might be that the culture around you, sorry, I just dropped something. Sorry for everyone watching the video. I just dropped something on the floor and had to pick it up. It might be that it makes you a good citizen of this world, but it might also mean that it might prepare you for a head-on confrontation and collision with the value of this world, in which case you won't be a good citizen of this world at all. You'll be a very bad one, and you'll be apt to be crucified. So that's the issue. And you've got to, this is something that the established church, I think, really has to understand, is that our role is not, I've said this a million times, our role is not to reflect the culture out there. Our role is to preach the gospel and to call the culture to repentance and faith, and therefore to transfigure it in the light of the gospel, right? And much of the time, that dynamic has been completely the wrong way around. It's just been the church's, and in many ways it still is. The church is just, and the church is attempting to mirror the values and the ethos that are out there in the secular age, when really what it should be doing is being completely different according to what the gospel says. Might be some commonality, but essentially being strangers and aliens in this land, in our exile in this world, and calling the culture to repentance and faith, and calling people to come and be part of the church, not just saying, oh, we're like you, we're just doing this so that we can be better citizens and we're all in this together. That's not the way. So that's my view. So on the whole, though, really good news, and that's great. And I'm really pleased to hear about Prince William. And as I say, like if anyone has any contacts, I mean, imagine how nervous I'd be interviewing Prince William. And Daniel and Tom would be like, oh, we must come up. We must be there. We must interview him with you. And I'd say, no, this interview's all for me. I'm taking all the glory. Ha, 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 ha. I mean, in all seriousness, I'd have to think really carefully about how to approach it. Yeah, that would definitely be a big one. That would be almost as big as interviewing Peter Hitchens, who joined us from his garden shed. Right, another story. Love these stories, don't you? Everyone, you love a good story, don't you? You love a really good story. All right, now this is interesting, and it's actually doubly interesting for me because I'm a governor at a Church of England school. I have a school, which is actually, this school unusually has two churches attached to it, but one of them is mine. And I've just been actually in the Easter service for the school this morning, and I've only seen this story this morning, but it's an interesting one. It's from the Telegraph. Strip Church of England of right to run state-funded schools, says public. A survey suggests people want shake-up of status quo with institutional reform. The Church of England should be stripped of its right to run state-funded schools, the public believed. A poll of more than 2,000 adults found that 6 in 10 believed the church should not control state-funded schools and should not be able to select children based on their faith. I'm not really sure what that last bit means, because I really don't think that children are selected based on their faith in Church of England primary schools. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's not a consideration. Despite the popularity of church schools among parents because of their performance and moral standards, the British public appears less convinced about their right to retain their religious status, according to research by More in Common. Now, who are More in Common? Might they have some kind of agenda? I don't know. Should we do a quick rock search, shall we? And see who More in Common are and what their agenda is. I'm going to do on here. So there's the link. Who are More in Common? Do they have an agenda? I mean, they all have an agenda, don't they? That's the thing, is all pollsters have an agenda. So what is their agenda? Because it's about the way you ask the questions, isn't it? It's about what questions you ask. So let's see. What's going to come up now? We are waiting with bated breath. Actually, nothing's happening at the moment. So, has anything come up? No. It says retry. You find that sometimes AI doesn't actually work. It just thinks for a while and then just says boom, nothing. Oh yeah, yeah. I think you're going to get the answer that I was suggesting. Is it going to come up or should I carry on reading? Oh yeah, more in common, which is it was commissioned by the National Secular Society. More in Common is the organization, etc. Who are they? They're a non-profit think tank and research organization founded in 2016 after the murder of Labour MP Joe Cox. It takes its name from Joe Cox's famous line, "We are far more united and have far more in common than that which divides us." Their core mission is to study what drives polarization and division in society, then find common ground to bring people together. In the UK, they act as blah, blah, blah. They are not a campaign group or political party. Do they have an agenda? Not really their own, but here's the important context for this specific poll. This poll was commissioned and paid for by the National Secular Society, a well-known campaigning organization that has spent years pushing to end all state-funded faith schools, remove bishops from the House of Lords, scrap compulsory religious worship in schools, and separate religion from the state more generally. The NSS then published the results on their own website and used them to argue that Britain has changed, man. And the Church of England's historic privileges, including running thousands of taxpayer-funded schools, should end. So the agenda belongs to the NSS, not to More in Common. More in Common simply carried out this thing, etc., etc., etc. Okay, never mind. Let's read a bit more so we know what's behind it now. It's reflected in wider findings in the survey showing that the public is largely opposed to the Church of England's automatic representation in the House of Lords, its role in the national ceremonies, and the continuation of the King as the Church's supreme governor. The poll shows a growing number of people turning their backs on religion and an increasing belief that the political and civic privileges afforded to the Church are in need of reform. The findings come a day before Sarah Mullally, blah, blah, blah. We already know about that. The research manager at More in Common said this report shows that in an increasingly irreligious country, most Britons see religion as a private matter. People broadly support the right to express religious beliefs, want individuals' faith to be respected, and recognise that religion can bring real personal benefits to those who follow it. But this should not be mistaken for an anything goes attitude. Not really sure what that means. Many Britons believe religion should remain open to legitimate criticism, including concerns about religious extremism, which almost three-quarters say is a real problem in the UK. Yes, I believe that as well, but we're not pointing the finger at Christianity there, are we? Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. The public is also clear that faith-based institutions should not receive any special treatment from the state. Well, good job we don't listen to the public then, isn't it? Lol. Yeah, so the thing about faith schools. Faith schools, which account for a third of all state schools, are fully funded by the government, but have greater freedom in teaching religious education and determining their ethos. They are permitted to use faith-based criteria to prioritize pupils of their own religions if they're oversubscribed. I mean, whether that actually happens in practical reality, I would be skeptical. It definitely doesn't happen here. And, also, if you actually think about your average Church of England school, and granted, this is, who these people are, these 2,000 adults, they probably don't know anything, many of them probably don't know anything about Church of England schools. But like, the Church of England school here, right? So you've got me, I'm a vicar. There's another vicar who is the vicar of the other church that's associated with the school. Like we occasionally go in and do assemblies and things like that. They come into our church building to like do their Easter service. I am an ex officio governor, but to be honest, I don't really know anything about education, so there's not very much I can kind of offer, although I could get involved, say, if I had time and expertise to, and that's the way it is. But whether whether or not somebody is a teacher in a Church of England school, that or the head teacher or whatever, it's got nothing to do with their religion. I suppose they've got to be kind of like sympathetic to Christianity in some sense and open to Christian values. But what we're talking about here is very generic values, which most people would be in favor of: kindness, compassion, you know, charitable attitude towards other people, forgiveness, and all this kind of stuff. It's hardly a kind of Christian indoctrination center. And like I've said, I'm pretty sure that no children are screened for religious beliefs in order to go there. Apparently, according to this poll, a similar proportion, 45%, said that the church should no longer have a leading role in national ceremonies such as the coronation of the monarch, royal weddings, funerals, and Remembrance Sunday. That compared with 36% who felt the church should have a leading role. I mean, sometimes when you hear the opinions of the British public, it is rather depressing, isn't it? You know, I mean, I'm sure that this survey is biased, but you just think like, what's the alternative? What alternative? What's your wonderful alternative that you'd like to suggest in as a way of doing those things without involving the church? This is my, just think about what you're saying. The coronation of the monarch, you want to do that without stripped, divorced of its religious context. It's meaningless outside of the Christian religious context in this country. Royal weddings. What? So you're going to have what? You're going to have them in a registry office now. Funerals and Remembrance Sunday. So you just strip all the religion out. And I mean, this is obviously is associated with the monarchy as well. So it's interesting to sort of think about. But really, what people are implying by saying this is that they want these things to be more politicized than spiritual in that sense. So you just think about it, you get rid of the king, you get rid of the bishops, you get rid of all the religious representatives, and what you're left with, well, you're just left with the state, aren't you? So there's the monarch without the church, the coronation of the monarch without the church. What's that? Who would do it? Who would who would coronate the monarch without the church? Um, the Remembrance Sunday would simply be an act of the secular state. I mean, it would be Keir Starmer presiding, and that's I think what you have to recognize. The kind of anti-monarchist crowd and the anti-religion crowd is that that's the alternative. It's a bleak, technocratic, managerialist, grey state representing everything instead. And if you want to know something of what this looks like, and I'm not really being critical here, but you look at the US, because the US doesn't have a monarch, right? And it doesn't have a state religion. And so who is the monarch in America? Who's the king in America? Well, it's Trump, right? There's no symbolic division between the president and the king in that sense. And you don't have a state religion, so you don't even have some kind of symbolic representation of the state religion as we do here. Obviously, there are problems with it, but nevertheless. And so everything is vested in Trump. Like who is America? Well, Trump is America, right? Trump is Mr. America. He's the king of America. But if you look at our country, well, you don't have a single figure like that. You have a prime minister, but he's apt to be dismissed as a managerialist technocrat who, won a loveless landslide and doesn't really represent the country in any meaningful way at all. You have a king who symbolically represents our spiritual and national and historical heritage. And you have an Archbishop of Canterbury who is the representative of the national church. Now, as just, everyone knows I'm not happy about many things to do with the Church of England. I don't support the ordination of women, and I don't think it's the right thing for the Archbishop of Canterbury to be a woman. But nevertheless, it's better than not having an Archbishop of Canterbury, which is what these people would be suggesting we should do. And with these kind of surveys, I always feel skeptical because well, it might be the case that, for example, almost two-thirds said religion's not important in their lives and so on and so forth. But whether or not this actually demonstrates increasing levels of secularization, I'd be very, very skeptical about that. People are like the National Secular Society, their beliefs are predicated upon the secularization hypothesis that as things move on, technologically and in terms of our knowledge and education and so on, that people will become less and less religious, but it's just not so. And I think that one of the things that's really interesting about the Quiet Revival report, which showed an increase in church attendance, particularly amongst young people, is that there's an uptick. It's like maybe this has hit a wall, or if to use a slightly different metaphor, maybe the pendulum is starting to swing back in the other direction. Because that secularization hypothesis is really based upon the idea, it's predicated upon the idea that as we learn more about the nature of reality, we'll increasingly learn that all the religions are false. But I don't believe that's the case. I think as we learn more about the nature of reality, we'll actually see the reasonableness of the Christian view of reality, and it will become increasingly more plausible to people than the materialist secular view, which is as we go on, as we learn more about science, I would say is just increasingly less plausible. The whole concept of materialism, like from a philosophical perspective, that matter is the only thing that exists, is less and less plausible as we learn more and more about the atomic and subatomic atomic world, and all those subatomic particles and all this kind of stuff. You recognize that actually the nature of matter, the nature of reality, is actually far more complicated than we thought, and it's actually a very live philosophical and scientific question as to whether there is any such thing as matter at all, because mostly it seems to be empty space. And yet the materialist is saying, well, that's the reality. You see the matter, it's there, we can touch it with our hands, that's all that exists. But increasingly, people, just on an intuitive level, they just say, well, I'm not really sure about this. And it's not just from a philosophical and metaphysical level, but also a phenomenological and an existential level as well, because people are thinking, well, this doesn't really answer the questions that I have in my life. It doesn't give me a way of conceiving of myself as a human being or of giving me direction or meaning or purpose in my life. And I'm increasingly finding it miserable and empty. And it's not really chiming with my sense of what reality truly is. And so, I've always thought of the National Secular Society as kind of a bit, well, not always, but recently, in recent years, I've thought of it as outdated. It's kind of redolent of that sort of passe new atheism thing, and they are kind of irritating now, just with these sort of endless campaigns to, try and remove any vestiges of our Christian inheritance because they are convinced by this idea that, religion is evil and blah, 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 and all this kind of stuff. So that's my view about that. So there we go. So interesting stories, and just making a note because it's easier for me to write the show notes later. Um, Gosh, the weather is crazy here. I mean, I don't know what it's like where everyone else is, but there's been a lot of rain and stuff the last couple of days, and the wind has been insane. I'm next to a window, which is why I'm saying that. So let me say something about the US-Iran war before I finish. Um, this is one of those matters where I'm tempted just to not talk about this because for a number of reasons. One of them is, I feel personally like I'm not really across the geopolitical knowledge enough to have a really strong opinion about it. I'm not an expert. I'm a vicar, right? So all I can do is just talk from the perspective that I have, and I am not a geopolitical expert, right? So there's that. There's also the fact that the correspondence we get about it is extreme on both sides. We don't have people writing in, generally speaking, say, well, a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B. I have people writing in saying, you must strongly denounce the war for all of these reasons. Like it's just it's justified by propaganda, and it's whatever, right? And so on. And then on the other side, you have people saying you must support the war because the war is completely necessary in order to defang the Iranian regime, which would have nuclear weapons, and they'd be able to blow up everyone, and so on and so forth. I am completely open-minded about it, and I'm happy to have debate because it's going to be an increasingly relevant thing as we go forward. Here's where I'm at with it. You tell me what you think. In general, I am a political nationalist, so I believe in the importance of the nation state, and I'm not in favor of nations invading other countries and attacking other countries in order to affect regime change. All right. In general, I just don't think that's a particularly good thing to be doing. Had I been of this persuasion at the time, I wasn't really old enough or hadn't really developed my views enough. So I was about 12 when we invaded Iraq for the second time. I wouldn't have been in favor of that, or the invasion of Afghanistan or anything like that. I just think this kind of foreign adventurism, it's based on a kind of, that sort of liberal idea that we have these kind of Enlightenment values and we can just install them by military force into these, e.g., Middle Eastern countries. And I don't think that's a very good idea at all. I think nation states should govern themselves, protect themselves, but I don't think they should try and impose their Western ideology on other nations. So that's just one thing I think. And I think JD Vance is kind of like he's got that presupposition in the back of his mind as well. I've been very influenced by reading Yoram Hazony on conservatism and nationalism in that respect. And I agree with that as a kind of basic viewpoint. That said, there are reasons for just war, in my opinion. I buy into, to a certain extent, the Christian just war tradition. That is that there are sometimes justifiable reasons going to war, and there's a justifiable way to behave in war. And, to me, it's an open question of, as to whether or not we should have gone, or the US should have gone to war with Iran. It seems to me to be a reasonable justification to say Iran were developing nuclear weapons and they may have been able to, e.g., point them at America or Israel or wherever, and that had to be stopped. I don't know if that's true or not, but that is one potential justification for it. Would it be a justification for it to say they were going to affect regime change in Iran? I would say probably not, if that's the reason, as much as the regime is awful and we don't like it. Generally speaking, I'm not in favor of those kind of actions. So I'd be less hawkish on that than Daniel would be, unless it was to affect regime change in order to not get blown up by nuclear weapons, which is obviously different or related, though not exactly the same matter. So that's where I'm at in terms of those issues. Last week, the Iranians launched, I think it was an intercontinental ballistic missile, which reached the base at Diego Garcia. And that is further away from where those missiles were launched than London is. And that implies that Iran have the capability to launch missiles at Britain, but at London, and so on. And so that is somewhat worrying. And so, in my opinion, if it was like somebody made me the prime minister right now, which I understand is not going to happen, I wouldn't want it to happen. Thank you very much. But if somebody made me the prime minister now and said, what we're going to do about this, I would say we need to support America in and Israel in the war against Iran, because regardless of whether or not we agreed on it, on the initial attack, this is the world we live in now. It's a world which is at war, and I think we need to support. When we need to be allied with America, really, and just in general. We're not a strong enough nation to be out there on our own. I don't want to see us moving closer to Europe, although that's obviously what Keir Starmer wants. So I think we have to. I think we have to be all in with America, and I think we have to support them in what they're doing. Because we have to protect our own interests, basically. It's not because I want, our ideology to be imposed on Iran particularly. It's just that we have to do what's best to protect ourselves. And at the moment, to me, it seems like the best thing to do to protect ourselves is to support America so that America can win this war in whatever way America wants to, in whatever way Trump and everyone else is trying to. That seems to me to be the best way forward. And it's based, I hope it's clear that what I've said there is, I did my little Trump gesture there. I hope it's clear that what I've said there is based on reason, I suppose, and logic. I suppose my sort of question to people who say, oh, you can't support this. I mean, people on YouTube have just gone crazy a couple of weeks ago when Daniel put in a support for the war. I suppose my question to those people and, anyone who wants to comment is, what is the alternative at this point? If we stay out of it, we leave ourselves incredibly vulnerable as a Western nation. Um, is that what we do? We just allow ourselves to be, we allow ourselves to become a target, a defenseless target, and the people in our nation to become a defenseless target for Iran. Doesn't seem like a very good strategy going forward. Just in general, we need to be allied with the US. We need to be close to them. We need in that case to be on their side in this war. Again, even if we don't become a target for Iran, it's not going to go well for us if we don't support them. So I just can't really see that staying out of it is an option at this stage, because staying out of it is an act of hostility towards the US. So that would be my opinion. As I say, with the caveats, I am not an expert, number one, not claiming to be. This is not an area where I feel like I've got a particular um, kind of pedestal from which to speak, in which I feel like I know something in particular. So number one, not an expert. Number two, very open-minded, happy to have my mind changed. Please don't get really angry with me. I find it difficult, I suppose when people say, like I on YouTube, a couple of weeks ago, a number of people are unsubscribed. You're saying something I don't agree with, unsubscribed. To me, like that's not the way I do things. Well, it's not the way I want things to be done. It's not the way I hope listeners are to this podcast. This isn't an echo chamber. Like people can have different opinions. If you want an echo chamber, you may have to listen to another podcast, because we try to think for ourselves, in line with a certain Christian approach. And we don't just go along with things just because it's what the right might say, or it's what a certain group of people might say. We evaluate the issues as they come. So, please don't unsubscribe from the podcast because we say something you'll disagree with, because, that's very, very likely to happen. And if that's the way you act, then you're never going to listen to any podcasts, and you don't want to not listen to a podcast as well. I mean, well, that would be sad for you. Anyway, that's what I've got to say about that and my views on that. And as I say, email in and tell me what you think, because I'm interested in your views, listener and viewer. So thank you. Thank you for listening. Really, really appreciate it. In a minute, we're going to do the hymn of the week, but this is just a quick plug to say, please do support the podcast. You do benefit if you become a member or a supporter of this podcast. You get our bonus podcast, which is called Uncollared, where we, generally speaking, chat a bit about various things. Often we answer your questions. Today, I did quite a lengthy bit about Stoicism, Christianity, and other religions, and how we might think about these things. That was a solo thing, but normally it's a sort of a banter-filled time with Tom and Daniel, or one of them at least. And it's a very good bonus podcast. So you get that, and you also get the episodes early. And it's really important that you subscribe, because this podcast is funded by you, the listener and viewer. You literally make it possible. If you didn't support us, the podcast would not exist, because I'd have to find, apart from anything else, I'd have to find another way of making an income. I'm a part-time vicar. I live off money I make podcasting and writing. So I really do depend on this. And of course, it costs money to run the show as well. So there are expenses involved. So it really is important that you support. Go to reverendpod.com and then click on the big red button to become a Patreon. Or you can just go to patreon.com/reverend. All the links are on the show notes. You can also support us on Substack, reverendpod.substack.com, if you don't like Patreon for some reason. I do tend to ask for questions on Patreon, so I think it's probably the best place to be. Patreon.com/reverend. You can always just give directly to us. Send me an email at reverendpod@gmail.com if you would like to do that. All of it's really appreciated. You can also buy us a coffee. I'd always say give directly rather than buy a coffee, but if you like the Buy Me a Coffee website, please use it. All of the links are on the show notes below the podcast episode. It's really important, really helps, and you benefit as well. So it's win-win, win-win-win. All right, so now we are going to do a hymn of the week, and this is a hymn for Passiontide, and it's a super hymn. And again, it's one of the hymns which maybe is slightly less well known. It's called "The Royal Banners Forward Go." This is a classic Passiontide office hymn. It's in the Revised English Hymnal, which is a great Hymnal, great office-tide passion hymn. The royal ban they call it the royal banners, and it's the office hymn for passion tide in the revised English hymnal. I just wanted to get it up. That's why I did an extended Trump impersonation there. So it was written, the text was written in AD 569 by the poet and bishop Venatius Honorius Clementianus Fortunatus, often called Fortunatus, and it was translated by John Mason Neale, who was a prolific hymn translator, and he was an Anglican priest and scholar. He's buried in a churchyard in East Grinstead in Suffolk. I've seen his grave, but he's many hymns that we still sing were translated by John Mason Neale. Probably, maybe the best known is "O Come, Emmanuel." That's the one that you all know will be his translation, and the one we're about to listen to is "The Royal Banners Forward Go," and it's by him. The original melody is ancient Gregorian plain song. It's a beautiful melody. It's quite a complex melody. You can't quite place the key of this piece. It's got you'll hear it in a minute. It's got a lovely kind of lilting melody. It's a simple, stately chant, and that's the one that's been the main setting for many centuries. It's sometimes used, an alternative hymn tune, which is called Gone for Long Royal, is often used. Da dee da 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 dum. Apparently, gonfalon is an old Norman word for banner. I didn't actually know that. I've just read that. It was composed by Percy Carter Buck while he was the director of music at Harrow School, but we're not going to listen to that one. Theologically, why is it called the Royal Banners Forward Goes? It's a paradox. It's a meditation upon the paradox of the cross. So the royal banner is the cross. That's the paradox. It's the cross is, well, it's the image of defeat. It's the image of humiliation, but it's also like a military standard, vexillum, Christ the King advancing the kingdom, advancing in victory through the cross. So it looks like shame and defeat, but actually it's victory, and that's what's behind the name, the royal banners, in Latin vexilla regis, the or regis, the royal banner. In the third stanza, there is the line. Well, it goes like this. Fulfilled is all that David told in true prophetic song of old. Among the nations, lo, he reigns. God rules the world from the tree. That is actually not the translation that I'm familiar with. I just read it because I've got one up here. But essentially, a it's a reference to the Vulgate translation of Psalm 96, verse 10. Regnavit a ligno deus, or ligno deus. God reigns from the tree, which was taken to be a prophetic utterance referring forward to the cross in that imagery being a throne, and so on and so forth. So it's a beautiful hymn, and let's listen to some of it now. And as we listen to it, I might make some comments, but I won't say anything for, well, maybe let's listen to, I don't know. I don't know when I'll say something. Let's just listen to some of it. This is the verse I mentioned here. goes on like that for a while. It starts to, what would you say? It starts to elaborate on that theme with the cross. So, tree of beauty, tree of light, O tree with royal purple dyed, elect on whose triumphal breast those holy limbs should find their rest, on whose dear arms so widely flung the weight of this world's ransom hung, the price of humankind to pay and spoil the spoiler of the prey. O cross, our one reliance hail, so may thy power with us prevail, to give new virtue to the saint, and pardon to the penitent. To thee, eternal three in one, let homage meet by all be done. Whom by the cross thou dost restore, preserve and govern evermore. Beautiful, beautiful hymn. And once again, just comes together so well in the Anglican tradition. The plain song, the words, and so on, and then they are, translated and transmitted to us through an Anglican priest and scholar. And once again, reminded to be grateful for the for the tradition that we inherit in the Church of England and why it's so important to share this with people, not because it's some kind of, stuffy thing that we have to safeguard out of anxiety, but just because it's so beautiful, so wonderfully kissed by the Holy Spirit. I'm going to finish there. Really enjoyed it. Sometimes it's just nice for me to do one by myself. I always try and get Tom and Daniel on. Most of the time they are on, but sometimes it's just nice for me to talk to you, the listener and viewer. I'm going to finish now by praying the collect for the Sunday next before Easter, as it says in the Book of Common Prayer, as it's called in the Book of Common Prayer. You may know this Sunday as Palm Sunday, and then we're going to be going into Holy Week. I want to wish you all the best for the Holy Week. Whether you're going to, please do go to the services in your church in Holy Week. If there's a Triduum on Maundy Thursday, Good Friday, and Easter Vigil, please do go to them. It's the liturgical highlight of the year, and it will be supportive for your community and for your vicar. It really is wonderful. I love it. I find it deeply challenging with the sort of disciplines around fasting and abstinence and so on. It's challenging, but it's worth it because it lifts you to God. So may you be blessed as you prepare for Holy Week. May you be blessed as you enter into this wonderful journey from Palm Sunday on to the upper room and to stand at the foot of the cross, to kneel at the foot of the cross, and to await with growing anticipation the resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ, the resurrection of hope and life and joy. So let us pray. Almighty and everlasting God, who of thy tender love towards mankind has sent thy Son, our Saviour Jesus Christ, to take upon him our flesh and to suffer death upon the cross, that all mankind should follow the example of his great humility. Mercifully grant that we may both follow the example of his patience and also be made partakers of his resurrection through the same Jesus Christ. Amen. Folks, thank you very much for listening. Thank you for watching. A big thank you, especially to you if you subscribe to this show. And if you're thinking about doing it, please do it today. Patreon.com/irreverend. All the links are below the show in the notes. And of course, send me an email. Tell me what you think. irreverendpod@gmail.com. That's all for now. Until next time, keep watch and keep the faith.